Good afternoon. It's high noon in Austin, Texas, which means that it is time for another Texas Public Policy Foundation policy live stream. It really doesn't even matter what your top issue is as a member of the audience. It might be something we're not talking about today, because what we're talking about today affects everything. We're going to be talking about meeting workforce demands, especially in the struggles as we recover, not just from COVID as a health issue, but also as a policy and economic issue. And you can hear the excitement in my voice because I'm such a fan of the three gentlemen who have joined us today. They really are experts in each of their fields, and you're going to hear that. And I'm hopeful that by the end of our conversation, which you get to participate in at the bottom of the hour, that you're going to know more about how you can take some steps to help these three great Texans do what they're doing, not for their self-aggrandizement, but for the people of Texas. You know, one of the challenges of having a place that's so great to live and a place that's enjoyed so much economic prosperity as Texas has is making sure that we update our educational systems in a way that produce workforce. And obviously, there are many aims to education, first of all, about the human person, but also making sure that we are productively employed. And that's real important to those of us here in Texas, because we want to give individuals as many opportunities as they're willing to seize. It's ultimately up to them. But we have to be sure that we on the policy side are doing what we can to provide the opportunity for those people to seize. So I will briefly introduce our guests. It's a real treat to have them here, especially all three of them at the same time, and we'll get into our conversation. We'll start first with our friend, member of the Texas Senate, Senator and Chairman Larry Taylor from the Galveston area. Chairman, you head up the Education Committee in the Texas Senate, and we get the pleasure of working with you on most things education. It's great that you would take the time out of your schedule to be here. Thanks for joining us. Also, from my background as a former college president, it's always great to see Chancellor Mike Reeser heads up Texas State Technical College. For those of you who are tuning in and have not heard of Texas State Technical College, you're in for a treat to hear about the Chancellor and how his staff handle workforce demands. And finally, last but not least, great friend in the policy area, Scott Norman, who's CEO of the Texas Association of Builders. Scott, we're going to learn a lot about what's going on in the construction industry, so thanks for taking time to be with us. So it's fitting, Chairman Taylor, that the first question would go to our politician friend. So it's coming your way. And it's a question about unemployment. Obviously, even in Texas, where we've been enjoying a lot of prosperity over the last several years, we haven't been immune from the effects of COVID and the shutdown. And I'm curious about your thoughts, given how much of a leader you've been in education and workforce policy, how you see the challenges and opportunities presented by COVID, perhaps clarifying some changes that might need to happen on the workforce side.
Well, I mean, COVID has been actually a double whammy for Texas, with the COVID shutdown on its own, but then the reduced demand for oil and gas. So we're actually getting a double whammy economically. As far as dealing with it, it's been quite a challenge from the education perspective. Right now, we've been dealing with getting our higher ed universities and community colleges and technical colleges back up and running. Visiting with those folks, how they can do that and keep people safe, and that people feeling safe when they're there, so they have confidence to get back involved. Our community colleges generally run counter to the economy. When the economy is doing well, our enrollment at community colleges is down because people have jobs and they're working and they don't think about it. It's during times like these that the demand goes way up. COVID, I call it a BC and AC, before COVID and after COVID. We're going to see a lot of changes from COVID, lessons that have been learned, some positive, a lot of things very difficult. Obviously, no one was looking for something like this, but people are going to be doing business differently, and a lot of these jobs are going to be done differently. And so for our adults in Texas and our students, we have big goals to get our kids and our young adults with something beyond high school. It's so important for their careers, for their income, job stability. People that have degrees tend to stay in jobs even in down markets, much higher rates than those that don't. So we're really promoting that and pushing that. We've done a lot of work leading up to this, But right now, particularly for our community colleges, technical colleges, we've got to make sure we support them as their demand increases. Even though our budget is going to be tight, we need to make sure they're able to do that. A lot of that's being done virtually. When I talk about some of the lessons that are learned, some of the positive things, people are learning they can do some work from home in a lot of cases. And, we've got to make sure they have the skills to be able to do that successfully, and rework how we do some of these things. But a lot of these skills require people to be on the job. They're skills that they use their hands, and they have to be there. And so that's where our community colleges, our technical colleges really come in and make that happen for people. So from the state level, we did some great things last year for K through 12, our public schools, increasing funding $6.5 billion, but not just throwing money at it, really directing it at our current student body that we have today. When you have 60% of your students, 60% qualify for free and reduced lunch. And that's also our fastest growing demographic. And unfortunately, historically, that's also been the demographic that's gotten the least educational attainment. So we had to make a big switch on that. We were kind of planning on having done that last session. We're going to move into the higher ed area this session and do some good reforms there. Obviously, the budget's now going to be a big overriding factor in almost anything we discuss this session. But we are, from the state level, we recognize the importance of getting people upskilled, higher skilled, getting certificates, getting degrees. And so we're going to be there helping work with our partners in that to make sure it happens.
Well, Senator Taylor, thanks for that comprehensive response. I think you set the table well, not just for our conversation, but thinking about members of the audience who are interested in policy. And no doubt, some audience members have a real specific interest in what we're talking about, but most of them curious about what's going on with state policy, with the state budget, with education as a result of everything that's happened this year. And so I think your comments frame really well a good understanding of the Texas State Technical College. So Chancellor Reeser, just assume that there might be some members of the audience who haven't heard about your great institution, and maybe fill them in on what's unique about how you fund the college, and also why they need to know more about your college considering everything that's happened in 2020.
Well, thanks, Kevin. It's good to see you again. Unique is a proper word when you describe TSTC, because in the array of public education that we have here in Texas, we're blessed to have here in Texas. TSTC is indeed a unique institution, and it starts with our mission. The legislature told us 55 years ago when they created us, we want you to focus solely on career and technical training, and make sure that your top priorities are the high demand and high tech fields of Texas employers. And so for more than a half a century, that's exactly what we've done. Another unique feature is our scope. We're the only two-year school in Texas that is statewide in nature. All the others are local entities that focus on a given geographic area of Texas. That also impacts our funding. As a public institution, we get all of our public funds from the Texas legislature and levy no property taxes anywhere in the state. So, and then regarding that funding, the way in which the legislature appropriates money to TSTC is unique, we believe, in the whole country. And that is, our public funding comes from the employment outcomes of our students. And we receive no funding whatsoever, or progress payments, if you will, on any of the coursework or other things that we do as we prepare a Texan for great employment. And then finally, we are the only school we know of in the whole country that has a money-back guarantee for students. We've selected a half a dozen of our top programs, those that lead to great jobs in Texas, and we made a promise to students who sign up for that. And that is, if we can't help you find a job with this credential within 6 months of graduation, we'll refund 100% of your tuition. We've had that program in place now for 3 or 4 years, and I'm glad to say that's how many refunds we've given among thousands of graduates. One.
Congratulations. And those of us who know you pretty well know that you're not someone to boast unless it's about the success of your graduates. And so I'll just tout that further and say, there is no other example like this in the whole country. And all of us as Texans ought to be really proud of that. It's an achievement, not just for your graduates, but also for us. And someone who knows that really well, given his background, is our friend Scott Norman, again, with the Texas Association of Builders. And Scott, just invites you to comment, not just on what Senator Taylor and Chancellor Reeser have already said, but maybe provide us some context about what's going on in construction, considering that even with the shutdown and with COVID, that I see a lot of construction going on, and which means, to sort of connect all those dots, your industry still has a significant workforce demand.
It does. Thank you again, TPPF, for having us, allowing me to join you today. Texas has been blessed since the mid-late 2000s economic downturn. We've led the nation in housing starts. Our association members are responsible for about 90% of the single-family housing put on the ground in this state, a large percentage of the multifamily as well. And in both the single-family and multifamily space, Texas has been a leader. We've been the #1 state for over 10 years. We have had 4 of the top 10 markets in the United States in housing. And because of that, we have had a great need, as my colleagues on this panel know, for workforce of all types in the construction space. That existed before COVID. It continues afterwards. As you said, with everyone sheltering in place, working from home, going to school from home, it seems that many of those homes are getting a little crowded, and people are looking to move up or expand or remodel. They're there all day, every day, at night. Maybe they're deciding that they need to make some changes. And so residential construction and interest rates are at historic lows right now. And so residential construction has remained strong. We were deemed an essential industry. Obviously, when people are needing their houses more than ever, day and night, that it's imperative that we're able to maintain those homes and supply new. And Texas has been blessed with a robust economy. The job growth has been strong. The population growth has continued to be strong. And those are what drive residential construction. And so we are seeing in our markets all across the state, as Senator Taylor alluded, the oil and gas downturn has certainly affected a little bit in certain areas of the state, but we continue to see a strong demand for housing, and many of our builders are still having very strong, if not in a couple of cases, record months, even post-COVID. And so that is continuing. We hope it continues, and I think it will as we come out of this on the other side. All the advantages Texas has in affordability and supply, but a huge component of that is workforce, and our friends at the high school level and then post-secondary education are very important to supplying that future workforce.
Well, thanks for everything you're doing, your leadership. It's really important that you said what you said, Scott, that people in Texas and folks tuning in from outside Texas understand how crucial the construction industry is to the prosperity that we enjoy, for that matter, our lifestyle. And obviously, one of the reasons those opportunities exist for your member businesses is because the economy has been strong, and Texas historically has had an education system that we can be proud of. And so what I want to do is just drill down a little bit more on something you, Chancellor Reeser, said about your funding at Texas State Technical College. It would seem that the way you're funded would present a certain risk to the institution because it's outcomes based. And so I'm curious if you can speak to that just with a little more detail for our audience members. And then I'll follow up with you, Chairman Taylor and Scott, about your own thoughts about perhaps scaling that kind of model throughout government. Chancellor?
Thank you. The beauty of the approach the legislature used when we were converted to an outcomes-based approach is the whole design of the formula started with our mission. And any funding formula should start with the mission of the institution. TSTC is blessed to have a very focused mission, and that is supply highly skilled technicians to the Texas workforce. And so it was easy during the development of the formula to determine that it is the employment outcomes of those technicians that are the true ultimate objective of a technical school. And so tying our funding to that was an easy decision. The devil was in the details, and it took quite a number of years to get it worked out and working correctly, but now it does. Regarding risk, what's interesting is as we went from the hour-based funding to the new funding, we realized that the operational risk and the employment risk that is inherent in any higher ed situation was being transferred from the legislature to the institution. That risk belongs to TSTC. And although that may seem scary at first blush, every businessman out there that is listening today knows that they run their business and own the risk, the performance risk that they cope with every day. And so for TSTC, what it did was it turned us into a very entrepreneurial sort of school. We are very concerned about adding value to our students and making sure that value is relevant to the employer needs of the state. So it got us laser focused on what are the needs of Texas and how can we produce technicians that are right for the state. The beauty is it's not rocket science in terms of finding out what's in really high demand. And so we were able to determine that, shape our program mix in such a way that our output is exactly what Texas employers need.
Well, it's very exciting. Having run a private college in a different state, I can appreciate what you mean about owning that risk. It's just a nature of being in business. And so I'll get to you here in just a moment, Scott, because I know you'll have some good thoughts about that. But what occurs to me immediately, Chairman Taylor, is a question that probably on the minds of some of our audience members. What does the legislature think about what they've seen regarding this model and frankly, the success of TSTC? And is there the opportunity to replicate that in some other educational institutions? That sounds like you're on mute, Senator.
I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
Had some extra background going on. But anyway, your question is on target really with what we did last session. Part of what we did included outcomes-based funding for our schools. It's called the College Career and Military Ready Bonus. And, you know, at the end of 12 years of public education, or 13 now, in some cases, 14, we're going with pre-K for some of our students. What are you supposed to be doing during that 12 to 14 years of public education, if not getting people either college, career, or military ready? So we've actually put a bonus in there, similar to what we would do with TSTC, but this is just for graduates, not necessarily what they do after, but part of getting this bonus is proving that they can get the certification or the job in those areas. And we put some sizable bonuses out there for our schools. We didn't just give them more money. We also put a carrot out there. Get these kind of things done and you'll make more money. For example, I talked about our high percentage of students who qualify for a free and reduced lunch. For every student above 13% of your student body and that qualifies for this, that is graduating college, career, military ready, we're giving the school district $5,000 to get those students. And these are the kids and the students who have not been getting that type of education in the past. So this kind of thing drives innovation. We all know about human nature and funding. And so this is a great, for our students who are not college, who are not socially, economically disadvantaged, for everyone over 25% of the graduating class that qualifies for college, career, military ready, we're giving them an extra $3,000. And then finally, for our special needs students who we're always, I think you're always going to be judged as a nation, as a state, and how you treat those who need the help the most. And in that case, every student who graduates out of a special education program, who graduates college, career, military ready, we have a $2,000 bonus for those students. So we're taking that outcomes-based funding and taking it to another level and bringing it into the K through 12 arena, as well as other innovative things like paying really good teachers more money. and then paying really good teachers who choose to go work on more challenging campuses even more money. So we've got teachers that are going to be making an additional $32,000 a year if their school district is willing to take on that task of finding out who their best teachers are, paying them more money, and then actually, if they get them to go work on the more challenging campuses, pay them even more money. Once again, it's all about trying to give every student in Texas, regardless of their socioeconomic circumstances, an opportunity to get a great education and participate in this great, this state that we have that is such an economic star, not just our country, but in the world. But we want to continue that into the future, and we needed to do that. And I think we're well on our way.
Sure. People, as I travel the country, ask, how are y'all, which is all 29 million Texans, going to keep Texas, Texas, meaning it's a great place to live, which has been for centuries. It is a place with tremendous opportunity. Basically, if you're here and you wake up in the morning, the world is your oyster. Having said that, there are, of course, because it's a human enterprise, some structural obstacles to everyone having that opportunity. And I know that House Bill 3 will go a long way over the next several years in replicating the kinds of success that Chancellor Reeser has seen at Texas State Technical College. We're always interested here at the foundation, Scott, in what business thinks about this. And so I'm curious what your organization thinks about this funding formula for Texas State Technical College, as well as the achievement legislatively from last session that Chairman Taylor discussed.
Well, I think, as someone who works for over 10,000 member companies who are obviously every day have to get up and make payroll and keep their employees working and provide the future housing in Texas, we are driven by the bottom line many times, but a big part of that is the labor input that is needed to keep this going. And as you said, this Texas dream or American dream that we have going here, that's so great. And so we really appreciate, and we've been heavily engaged in this education space for over a decade, trying to make sure that, and I think the legislature, Senator Taylor and the legislature should be commended for the efforts they've done to make sure industry has a seat at the table so that the education establishment, if you will, and it wasn't always this case, is creating and developing pathways and courses and coursework so that when these students graduate, they do have jobs. Ultimately, it's about the students, and it's about they have educational opportunities and career opportunities when they get done with their education path, whether that be high school only or technical certifications or secondary education or whatever. The ultimate goal needs to be jobs for these people when they get done and ready to start their careers. And so working with the employers is very important. And I think the legislature, through the TSTC model, through what they've done the last few sessions, especially last session, creating industry-based certifications at the various levels of certification, whether it be TEA or the higher education, is exceedingly important. And we have participated in that. We've worked with TSTC, we've worked with community colleges, worked with higher ed to make sure that the courses they are teaching produce workers that are ready, at least to start the jobs. Obviously, you learn a lot on the job as well, but to get them in that pipeline, that ought to be the ultimate goal. And I think the legislature has really started turning that ship the last few years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And a follow-up question for you specifically, Scott, coming from someone who's an educator. In fact, I'd started my teaching career at Austin Community College here downtown on the East Campus. And even though I ended up going to some other campuses, I just still love the mission.
They've got a good construction program.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was just about to say, I love the mission of community colleges. And that's important framing for the question I'm going to ask, because sometimes this question is perceived as sort of being a threat to Texas community colleges, which it's not. But it's, here at the foundation, we call a spade a spade. And so is my observation correct if I make the claim that if we look at some opportunities for reform in the next session and beyond, one of the steps we might take is to get some Texas community colleges to step out of the way, to stop blocking some of the expansion of the kinds of models we see that are outcomes-based funding?
Well, that's certainly a thorny political question, but the ultimate goal is to provide for the demand for workforce that's out there. The way we've always approached it is there ought to be a right of first refusal. If a community college in a certain community or area has the ability to provide that need that employers are demanding, they should have the right to do that. If for whatever reason they cannot, will not, do not want to, then others that are ready, willing, and able to do so should be allowed to do so. We should not have arbitrary lines on the map ultimately affecting our citizens' right to further their education depending on where they live. And so that's something that I know is difficult, but I think that's something the legislature can certainly look into. We certainly would want to be a part of that discussion and support a right of first refusal type approach to give those first opportunity. But there are areas, and certain community colleges have quickly embraced moving to a more CTE focused program, and others have not. And it just kind of depends. But if the demand is there for those jobs, the education providers need to be stepping up to meet that need.
Yeah, I appreciate that response. And it is a thorny issue because people take pride in their local community college. And once again, I'll just reiterate, they ought to. And yet, I just try to square that with what I hear from employers, especially in Southeast Texas, where, even with COVID and the threat of hurricanes and hurricane season there, and this better than anybody, Chairman Taylor and Scott, and for that matter, Chancellor Reeser, there is always going to be a workforce demand that outstrips the supply of seats in a classroom. And those employers who are very willing to support the local community colleges have expressed to me, I'm not going to ask any of you to comment on this, I'm just sort of underscoring the point for our audience. They've expressed to me in an unsolicited way a frustration. And it seems as if adopting this right of first refusal concept is something that might break that logjam. And I'm personally enamored with that idea because I think what it does is puts the emphasis on the student, which is precisely where the emphasis needs to be in education, whether it's K-12 or whether it's higher ed. And so Chairman Taylor, just sort of pivoting off of that, although I'm thinking of you as I say it, because you've been so eloquent about emphasizing the importance of focusing on the student in a broader sense, just looking at the landscape of the upcoming legislature, all of the challenges that we have as a state, economically, particularly, perhaps even politically, just sort of set the table for expectations for our audience about the big issues, whether they're related specifically to workforce demand or more broadly, because I'm sure as we get into some audience questions, there might be some follow-ups.
Well, Kevin, I think we were on the right path. We started with House Bill 5 in 2013, which really was working towards getting our education lined up with what the workforce needed. With House Bill 3, we've done more enforcing that. We've also got a P-TECH program to go along with our early college high school that gets kids graduating with an associate's degree or a certification and a job at the end of their, in this case, 6 years high school and that includes on-the-job training as well as internships and all those things. So we're all gearing towards that. What we're seeing right now, the hiccup that's come along, obviously with COVID, one, not being in class for a lot of our students, but secondly, connectivity. Now, I've been promoting getting more technology in our classrooms when I'm talking about devices, internet access, those for a number of sessions leading up to this. We didn't know we were going to have COVID. But it worked out pretty well that we had done some of that work. So the schools were more capable of doing some virtual learning. But, the other issue we've come across, I've already talked about our demographics or our student body, but now when we move to virtual, guess who doesn't have all the tools necessary for virtual? They don't have the necessary laptop, or they may not have internet. So we have a connectivity issue. So the same people we were trying to make sure we address the gaps were now, we're dealing with that to make sure we're going to have some connectivity, some virtual education. And frankly, I hope we have virtual education not required, but as a supplement to education. There's so many benefits you could do for students if they had that capability at home. We have kids that are sick from school all the time. They don't have to miss a day of school with connectivity. They can review the same lesson everyone else had during that day. I see potential for self-paced education. So we can have kids move through some of the classes they know better than others. They can just move through that and not be sitting in a classroom bored to tears waiting for the rest of the class to catch up. So there's a lot of things we're going to learn about. We've got to have connectivity, one-to-one devices, internet access. And we've used some of the CARES Act funding that came to the feds, about $200 million, buying about 1 million devices for kids with devices and Wi-Fi hotspots or internet connectivity. to make sure they get them set up and ready to go. So we're working on that, but we're going to continue on this path. Like I say, it's been a total change. Frankly, since I've been involved in education, when I first moved to the Senate from the House, I was put on the Education Committee, and that was when House Bill 5 was going on. And my eyes were really open to our needs of where we need to be as a state and where we were literally falling behind, about to fall off. This is what I work on constantly, is make sure our students have the opportunities they need to get the education they have to be a success in this great state. So it's all towards that. We've got different funding methods. We're doing outcome based, but it's all towards that. You know, the overall goal of the state of Texas right now is 60 by 30. You may hear that thrown out every now and then. That's to have 60% of our young adults, like 18 to 34, have something beyond high school. 60% by the year 2030. Now, when I hear 60%, I think, wow, that's not really very good. Until you realize when we started, we were at 38%.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now somewhere in the mid 40s. So we're making progress along that goal, but we've got a ways to go yet. But for this state to continue to thrive, we have to meet those goals. And it's going to take everybody working together to get that done. And innovation, you know, COVID has brought all kinds of problems, distractions, interruptions. But out of these kind of times is when we come up with great innovations. And we've actually forced people into looking at technology who were hesitant before and kept holding back. And now they've had to do it and had to embrace it. And I can tell you, having gone through this in my own insurance office years and years ago, when we were first going online and doing computers and stuff rather than paper, it was hard. It was so difficult, and it would lock up and just blink at you. But I tell you what, once you get through it, you would never go back. And I think that's true of every other industry across this country. It's true of education. And I think now that they're seeing these innovations in action and starting to figure out what they really could do to enhance education, not replace teachers, but enhance having a good teacher. And the sky's the limit of what we can do with the students of the future.
Well, thanks, Chairman Taylor. And I'll just say, in case I forget to say it later, that for all of our members of the legislature, regardless of party, that supposedly part-time job is decidedly full-time. It makes it hard for y'all to run your businesses. And I would just say, because I pay so close attention to education policy, being an educator, that those of you who are on the education committees, that is particularly true for, and you in particular, and regardless of party affiliation or what someone thinks about political positions, we owe you a real debt of gratitude for being willing to spend so much time on behalf of the children of Texas. And so we're excited about the next decade. Chancellor, I was going to ask you one more question, but as is often the case with our live streams, the audience is much smarter than me. They're a step ahead. And so I'm going to ask the first question from the audience. So we've officially pivoted to audience questions. If you've not gotten your question in and you're in the audience, just go into the comments section of the social media channel you're on. All three of you are welcome to answer this, but Chancellor, I was really curious about this in your situation in particular at TSTC. This audience member asks, virtual education is great in a lot of contexts, but for skilled trades, there's only so much you can do when you're not hands-on. How have you met that challenge at Texas State Technical College?
That's a really good question. And fortunately, I have a great answer too. When the governor announced the COVID emergency back in March, and then subsequently locked down education, a benefit that TSTC had was this: our program mix fell into almost perfectly the critical, essential technical fields that had been identified by the Homeland Security Department and expressly exempted from the moratorium by the governor. So we got really busy melding together the safety protocols from the CDC and from various allied health professionals that we gathered together with our hands-on labs and created the ability to continue to do hands-on training at TSTC and do so in a safe manner. We had to do that because only 40% of our content could be ported to a web browser. The rest had to occur in person, because you're right, Kevin, you can't teach welding in a web browser. You can't teach how to wire an electrical panel or build a cabinet in a web browser. And so we were back at work in the TSTC labs the first week of May, and we're able to finish that semester, launch and complete a spring semester, and now have started a fall semester. And our rigorous contact tracing indicates that we have not had a single case of COVID infection occur while people are on a TSTC campus. So it can be done, but it's extremely difficult, takes lots of space, a lot more time, and the faculty at TSTC did a marvelous job of making it all happen. So we haven't missed a lick. We're still in business doing it, and other schools could do it too.
No surprise there that y'all were ahead of the curve, and what a remarkable success in itself for not having a single case of COVID, even though you're opening up in the middle of what was a second surge here in Texas in the virus. So I'm curious, Scott, to pivot off that point, just looking into the future for your industry, do you have any sense from your members or maybe research that you yourself have done about the number of construction jobs that are going to be needed over the next year or decade in Texas?
Well, the trend that existed well before COVID is continuing, is we have a graying workforce. I think the average age of a licensed electrician in the state is something like 58 or 59, and a plumber is 62 or 63, and that data is a few years old. And so like all of us, they're not getting any younger. And so we really have to work hard, all of those fields, whether it be frame and masonry, roofing, the licensed trades, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, we have to backfill, because as the state is going to continue to grow, we're going to need all of those types of skills going forward. And our CTE programs at the high schools and post-secondary level are going to have to be the ones to fill that need. And so that demand, as Texas is continuing to grow, whether we're leading the nation in housing starts or not, we are still going to be one of the top construction. Our members are going to on pace to build over 110,000 new single-family homes in Texas this year, despite COVID-19. You think about that, that's a very good-sized city getting put on the ground all over the state. A lot of them down there near Senator Taylor's neck of the woods. But that need is there, and it's going to continue. And following up on your other question, I think to remember as well, as all of our construction companies had to adjust their ways of doing business following CDC guidelines and OSHA guidelines. Yes, they were deemed essential, but they were having to reduce the number of workers on the job site, scheduling the crews out, spacing them out. Things take longer, and you're more spread out. I think what's somewhat unique to the CTE space is that they actually, maybe unlike some other education institutions that aren't using as much of their physical space right now, CTE needs more space. And I think the legislature needs to remember that, policymakers, as we go into this next session, because as Chairman Reeser said, you don't want someone building a house or building a bridge or doing medical procedures or anything else that haven't actually experienced hands-on learning. There's no replacement for that for many of the things that are in our area and other industries. And so that is going to have to continue to be done. And as an essential industry that is providing housing, we talk about all the time, Texas does a great job with economic development and creating new jobs, but those jobs have to sleep somewhere at night. We have to continue to build bedrooms and homes for people to live in as these jobs grow and our population grows. And so we need workers to do that. And that need will be continuing.
Well, that's true. And I can only presume that given that construction projects had an extended timeline during the challenging part of COVID, that there's going to be a bit of a backlog. And so I've encouraged people who are, I hear, looking for work to go work in the trades. And that actually is a good segue into the next question from one of our audience members. And it's one that was on my mind. This audience member asks, are the skilled trades deserving of the bad rap they get as dead-end jobs? And I'll ask each of you to take a crack at that. Maybe Chancellor, we'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. There was a time 50 years ago when our economy fit neatly into a kind of a duality. There was white collar and there was blue collar. And white collar consistently earned more and required a college degree to get to it. And blue collar was high school and earned less. Today's economy couldn't be more different. We no longer fit neatly into those old-fashioned notions. Today, there's a wide array of professions, and the trades in particular are high-paying professions. Those are the sorts of jobs one can have for life, raise a family of 4, and be a very strong contributing member to our economy with a good living. So I would say no, they don't deserve the rap.
Thank you.
And if I could, Kevin, add to that, you're part of House Bill 5, the discussion we had kids going to 4-year universities and graduating with degrees and being $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 in debt and couldn't get a job. Meanwhile, we had people going into these trades who were graduating with a 2-year associate's degree, no debt, and had a $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year job. So that's where we made this actually a transformation in the state government in looking at education and trying to break up what he just described as the blue collar, white collar. You know, some of the most successful people I know are in the trades. And you start down that path doesn't mean you may later end up owning your own company, doing your own thing. And I just, you know, in my previous insurance experience, I knew a lot of people just like that who ended up owning electrical companies, plumbing companies, did very well for themselves. These are not jobs they look down on. These are, and frankly, part of what we're doing now, even part of House Bill 3, is just letting younger students know what's out there, exposing them to some of these job opportunities. I grew up here in the petrochemical area, but I wasn't directly involved with that. I didn't really know what all kind of jobs were out there. But today's students are going to find out about what those opportunities are, what kind of education they need to get those jobs. And we're starting that as they're going in, starting high school versus waiting till your senior year to start getting counseling. Well, now what do you want to do? You just missed some pretty good opportunities that last 4 years of education. We're going to start early in that to try to expose kids in 8th grade what's out there, what would they be interested in, you know, because kids have different skills and talents, and to try to once again meet those kids where they are. A lot of those kids that we didn't have any CTE type stuff, career technology education, we call them dropouts, because we were all in this 4-year, everybody's going to university, and there were a lot of students that was not their path. They could tell that wasn't their path, and they're sitting going, why am I hanging out here for another 4 years in high school when they're gonna lead me to something I don't even want to do? I'm gonna go ahead and get to work. So that's part of the reason why we made that change as well. And I think it was a good time to make the change. And I think we're making good progress on that line.
I agree. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, follow up on what the senator hit the nail on the head. You know, one of the things our Builders Foundation, our 501c3 nonprofit, tries to do is expose students throughout the process to exposing them to the built environment and understanding that the world around them that they live in, every room they're in, every building they're in, was built by a multitude of different trades on the job site, creating the structures that we live and work in, go to school in, and everything else. And that's very important. And as he said, the tradespeople, the return on investment in getting a trade certification or an associate's degree, or even a 4-year degree in our instance, the construction industry, but it doesn't have to be anywhere in the CTE. Those, you may start out as a tradesperson, but you quickly become a small business person and have the opportunity to run your own business, run your own crews. And many of those people, many of our members, are the very, very large business owners of today that may have operations in multiple cities or even multiple states. There is great opportunity for a much smaller investment than your traditional 4-year degree in many of these CTE fields that I think the legislature it's one of the best things I think y'all did, Senator, is making sure that message gets spread, because a lot of people, if you didn't grow up with relatives or exposed to the construction industry, just like Senator, you said you didn't grow up necessarily petrochemical, you have no idea the job opportunities out there. And so part of the education process should be expose students to all the potential opportunities that are out there that may not otherwise be placed before them.
I couldn't agree more, Scott. And in fact, I think often about students that I taught at the high school level, and some of the most successful are those who realized that their path was different than going to a four-year college, or they went for a couple of semesters and not because they're dumb or they couldn't handle the work, they just realized they had a different calling. And so I think that's particularly true until and unless more four-year colleges take seriously the need for themselves to reform, which is a topic for a different conversation, but that's the kind of thing that really ought to be compelling some students to think more seriously about getting into the trades. And what I'm very proud of about Texas, especially given the work that happened in the legislature last year, is that we're really re-embracing the beauty of the skilled trades, that there not only shouldn't be a stigma, there ought to be a celebration about people choosing those career paths. It's gratifying to see. So Chairman Taylor, I have one question specifically for you, and although Scott and Chancellor feel free to jump in, and then we'll move into wrapping up. I've got a broad question I ask all of our guests, which is about where you find optimism for the future. But for you, Chairman Taylor, the question is about something that's dear to you, and that is dual enrollment programs. I'm curious if you might talk about how COVID has affected those dual enrollment career and technical education programs.
Well, there has been an impact. Even one of my local community colleges is trying to restrict people coming on campus when the school is still trying to push that. These are things we have to work through. I think COVID, once again, I'm an optimistic person. I think we're on getting to the better side. If you look at the numbers, it's trending the right direction and has been for a while now. I think it's a temporary setback, but we can't allow this health crisis we've gone through to become a long-term generational educational issue. So we're trying to promote getting kids back on campuses, getting our community colleges to open back up, particularly our dual credit. But like I say, a lot of this we're learning right now. Colleges have learned this. I've talked to chancellors as well at four-year universities. This has been a real learning curve for them. Their professors have been very hesitant to embrace virtual learning. And then I was talking to one of the chancellors about a doctoral dissertation where they had to do their defense of their dissertation, and they had professors from 4 or 5 different countries around the world sitting in on this doctoral student's dissertation defense, and they were all like, wow, this is really cool to be able to do this. So I think we're going to see some of those things come out of this, even at the university community college level, where we can give kids the value, the education, and hopefully lower the cost for many of our students to get these kind of degree programs that they need to do what they want to do with their lives. So I see great future. And I'll just tell you this real quick. During COVID, I would rather be nowhere else but Texas. This is a state that takes on challenges all the time. That's just what we do. It's how we started as a state. We were a country originally. We put man on the moon. We survived hurricanes and rebuilt. This is a state that knows how to roll up their sleeves, figure out what needs to get done, and get it done. And I couldn't be prouder to be from Texas and be a part of getting us through this.
That is so well said. You know, my optimism might be tempered slightly by sitting here in the city limits of Austin.
Yeah, well,
but I won't invite y'all to comment on that. But just saying that traveling the country more and more the last few months, this remains the best place to be. And I just want to address members of the audience who might still be fearful or, you know, maybe not up to date on the COVID data. We are not not only turned the corner, the trajectory of cases is in a very, very steep decline. And it's apparent as we talk to health officials that we've just about got this thing beat. It's really important we recognize that as leaders and move on. That's not to be dismissive of people who've been affected, including in the worst way, with family members having succumbed to the disease. But it is time to live again as a society. And as an educator, I've been worried throughout this whole time that at every educational level, we were creating a 20 or 25-year problem by not having students in the classroom. And so I want to thank each of you for being vocal leaders and also being very responsible in getting kids back to the classroom. So with that said, gentlemen, it's time to wrap up. And I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for the time you've spent with us. The last question I try to pose in each of these live streams is, considering all of the challenges we've had as a state and a country in 2020, considering some of the latent fear that's still out there, is there a message of optimism, of hopefulness from your job particularly, or just going about life in Texas, that you would leave our audience members with? Scott, we'll start with you.
Well, I think, and thank you for having us. Really appreciated this conversation today. I think, as the senator said about Texas and optimism, I think Texas is going to be one of the first states, if not the first state, to lead the country out of where we find ourselves economically. I think one of the positive outcomes is, people that have unfortunately lost their jobs or weren't planning on a career change. Maybe this will give them an opportunity to change paths and use the educational system that is out there for adult learning and transition into an area that there is great demand, and may be able to further their situation and improve their situation beyond where they were headed prior to COVID. And so it's one of those turning lemons into lemonade opportunities, but the jobs are out there, and this great state will be providing them. And so I think that opportunity abounds, and I'm glad we're here.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for everything you're doing for the people of Texas. Chancellor Reeser?
I could build on Scott's comments, although he's a tough act to follow. And that is this: despite the fact that we have some record unemployment across the country and here in Texas too, there are some amazing jobs that are going unfilled in Texas right now today. We have thousands of employers that are seeking talented people, and a great array of colleges and universities who can help people qualify for those great jobs. So do your homework, consider your ROI on time and dollar invested, and you'll end up with a great job for the right amount of money.
Well said. Chairman Taylor, last word.
Well, I think I said what I really want to instill with people. We are going to get through this. We're going to do it together, and it's really about balance and keeping things in perspective. I mean, looking at COVID, we need to put it in perspective compared to other things that have happened, but even balance. How do we open up the economy, still keep people safe? And with the numbers going out, I think you'll see that opening back up. We're going to come out of this, and like I say, I'm optimistic that this will be sooner rather than later. Maybe even November. Who knows? It might start getting better then.
Heck, I'm pushing for Tuesday after Labor Day.
Well, I'm just talking about the media perspective on this.
Yeah, I know. So, and thank you for that. Well, Senator Larry Taylor, our friend Scott Norman, Chancellor Mike Reeser, thanks so much for a great conversation. I was hopeful for our audience's sake that they would be able to see what we know in the policy sphere, which is not just your expertise in this policy area of workforce demands, but also the optimism you bring to it. Thanks for helping to make Texas such a special place. For those of you in the audience, thanks for tuning in. This live stream series, which we started at the beginning of COVID, has succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. And it's done so because you're generous with your time in coming here, not only once a week, but in a couple of cases, a few times a week. So thanks for joining us. May God bless you three gentlemen, all of you in the audience, and continue to bless the great state of Texas. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.